Data as an asset. My name is Kimon Onuma, and I have for almost 30 years now been working on information related to facilities and even building information modeling. And from 30 years ago, I thought this industry was going to switch over pretty quickly, but it's taken a long time. But I think things are changing this year, the last few years. There's some pretty amazing things that have been happening as we're seeing in this conference session that's future facing. So one thing that, as an architect, I have seen that data has always been there. Architects, engineers, owners, builders have been producing information in formats to be able to communicate the design intent, construction, and operation of facilities. And a lot of this embedded knowledge kind of gets lost in documents and even in technologies. The technologies are great, but a lot of them are still focused on the past, on delivering contractual documents or files that owners put away. And so that's been my frustration. How do we take this value of engineering decisions, for example, and make them more valuable for the project and make them more valuable for AI processes, for example, to analyze and make things faster and more efficient? The other angle is, what are owners thinking? How are they making decisions about what to build or not to build? In the early 2000s, we got involved with the Coast Guard. We work with a lot of government agencies. The Coast Guard is interesting because they have, although they have resources, they have relatively limited resources compared to other agencies. They have this kind of hero mentality that will go out and save people that are out at sea, whether we have a Coast Guard cutter or not. But after 9/11, they had a need to be able to switch and pivot their operations. So the supply and demand of facilities and new assets coming in was going to change. So this, along with many other projects, has taught us that everything's dynamic. As decisions are being made, you need to be able to switch on the fly and adjust the understanding of what your assets and facilities are and adjust the understanding of what you need to build. And there's many different stakeholders along the way that are both technical and non-technical. There's other challenges that need to be addressed to be able to communicate what do we need. Coast Guard was very early in the use of Google Earth, even at the time it was called Keyhole, but essentially we helped connect building information models and assets to facility management and visualization, no matter what platform you're in, and rapidly develop solutions for them. Another interesting owner is the California community colleges. They have 90 million square feet. They're one of the largest higher education owners in the world, with over 2.75 million students. Obviously, with COVID, things are changing. Again, another owner with very limited resources, but a lot of good and interesting data at different levels of detail. They had a database of their assets and facilities. We said, let's connect that to GIS and BIM applications on the web, be able to visualize, make decisions, and use it for many different things with very limited resources and time. So now what's happening is, as they change their data of the condition of the facility, for example, or how many students are in a building, or what our schedule is like, or where our utilities are, we see them in our different applications, both our own applications and other off-the-shelf applications, but basically connecting the dots regardless of what platform you're in, to be able to see the information and make decisions at many different levels of detail. So once you stabilize the information, then you can start looking across a portfolio and make decisions about the entire portfolio, the single campus, the building, the room, the piece of equipment, how we react to COVID, for example, with that information. And you allow different vendors and consultants and applications to plug into your data. And that's really why data is an asset. If you treat everything as a one-off project, then you're going to be constantly running into issues. If you start creating a platform of consistency, then you have consultants and vendors and stakeholders internally and externally, and many different owners talking the same language. And that was a big win for this, and it's still an ongoing multi-year, decade project by now that we've been working on, which got the attention of the Department of Veterans Affairs and Department of Defense Military Health System. Again, similar challenges, large organization, a lot of great knowledge and information in the wrong format. Even in an electronic format is not perfect. And you have a lot of architects and engineers and designers and subject matter experts making decisions of what goes into a hospital in formats that is not the right format, even if it's an Excel file or a database. So we said, okay, let's clean that up. What is that going to look like? If you break it down to the fundamentals, and that's also another important lesson, is you don't want to overcomplicate things. You want to keep it simple, be able to break it down and say what goes into a hospital. And obviously these requirements are constantly changing. So saving them into a room data sheet, into a format that cannot be dynamically updated, is still something from the past. So we helped them shift that. We said, let's put it on the web. Let's open it up to your internal applications to use to define the requirements of a project, and then open it up to everybody else. Make it public. Why not share your requirements through a web API so other applications can plug into it and create value out of it, such as automating design, which is a scary word for architects, but goes into another discussion of what happens when you start becoming so efficient that you're no longer spending time shuffling papers or Excel files or PDFs or BIMs that are standalone into something that starts becoming automated. And that was the end result of this project. We were able to say, let's park your information in a format that can make it useful for you internally on the web. Let's get it off these desktop apps and put it on the web. Build APIs, and you use that same API for your own application, define the requirements, and then open it up to other BIM applications on the web, including ours or any other vendor, to be able to automate the process of now we need to design and build a hospital. Having that, then all of a sudden we're going to go into the next part of the presentation, which I'm going to shift to, talking about platforms. So what's a platform? Once you have owner's data as an asset and you make it accessible, think in terms of shared services. We've all become used to shared services. Apps are disposable. Vendors and consultants should be interchangeable. We don't want to rebuild a satellite system to get GPS. The US government opened it up so other vendors and their consultants and anybody else in the world for that matter can locate themselves and build apps on top of that. So that shared platform incredibly reduces the amount of time it takes to build solutions. And every single owner that we work with kind of has this vision of we want to design and define requirements. We want to operate facilities. We want to manage projects, make them cost less, do them faster, all of that. And we are constantly, the formula is almost exactly the same. That's great. Let's start with the fundamentals. Let's get the information that you already have, get it out there in a format that's more useful to you, and then open it up selectively to the rest of the world or your consultants. And that can be decided by the owner what they do with that. But then ultimately that turns into, now we need to construct faster, we need to operate faster with our facilities. And the SEPS project with the VA and DHA was one of them. So these standards, thinking in terms of a platform, if we have some simple ways that vendors and consultants can plug into it, you have the simple rules, anything is possible after that. Obviously, this is a simplified version, and actually some of the other presentations from Jamie and Patrick kind of reinforce this idea, but you can start having modular kind of rules that then you use to build on top of. So this is the formula, really. You break it down into what's your data asset. Let's say equipment. What type of equipment goes into space? What's the function of a space? What type of projects do we have? And make that accessible as a data layer. Then you have a shared platform, whether it's an application or a web API, of how you get to that data. And then you can build applications on top of that, whether it's your own internal applications or allow other vendors. This is an actual example of vendors that plugged into the DoD and VA data that we recommended to them make accessible. So everyone's using the same rules. You're decoupling the data from the applications. Applications in the past tightly coupled the data with the application. So you have to ask, well, what application do we use to do CMMS? Or what application do we use to manage information? It should be disconnected. And obviously it's not going to happen overnight, but as soon as an owner declares our data as an asset, we're going to decouple it from the applications, and we want those applications to use our data to build solutions on top of. Then you can plug and play any application that comes along or any vendor or consultant that comes along, and that increases the value for the owner immediately. It's an agile way of building solutions, and it gets away from this tightly coupled, inflexible environment that we're in. And from a vendor, as a vendor or a consultant's perspective, it makes it much easier to work with that owner's information. It's very clear if equipment information changes, we don't have to rebuild the whole system. We just update the Lego of the equipment or that piece of equipment. Here comes a new piece of equipment that we're using because we need to get more air changes because of COVID or whatever it might be. Then the solutions that build on top of can react much more quickly. This is the future. We're in transition, but there's definitely this architecture already in place, and we're seeing it in this session, that you can do amazing things if you have access to information and you break it down into modules that makes it understandable. And the last part of this is you may need to make it accessible to many levels of users. There might be customers that go into a hospital that want to find that room with that doctor, for example. It's about that room. There might be technical teams or contractors that are building that hospital. There might be executives that want a roll-up of that information. Once you decouple the data and release yourself from the stranglehold of applications that hold the data, then all of this becomes possible. So we've seen, as I mentioned, similar patterns emerging. The patterns are very same, regardless of the size of the owner, the complexity of the challenge, the restrictions that you have from security perspective. We hear that all the time. Oh, we're special. We have different security requirements. Well, yes, that's important. But if you decouple things and break it down, then you can have both. And there's also that cultural shift that's required. How do you change the culture of an organization? How do you change the contract requirements? We do something called BIMstorm, which are exercises removed from contracts and doing testing. And this is actually an example from the CIA conference several years ago, where we had 15 minutes with the audience actually building and designing an airport. Well, we had offsite teams reacting to it and tools reacting to the requirements put in by the audience. And the point of this was that you don't need to be a technical expert if you have simple apps to interact with very complex systems. And there are amazing tools in the background that can do a lot of this. And all this should be plug and play, be able to do what you want with it. So the takeaways are: start simple with your existing data and knowledge. Treat it as an asset if you're an owner. If you're a consultant or a vendor, help owners get to that. Make the data machine readable. Make it accessible, the architecture from the beginning accessible to anybody, and then you can restrict who you want to share with or not. Don't restrict it from the beginning, and make it useful to many stakeholders. In other words, don't trap it into complex applications that only a few can use. Make the same data accessible to simple apps that you can do analysis with, for example. So that's the objective, is to be able to plug and play and treat it as modules and build the projects or not build the projects or manage your facilities. If you don't have that information, you can't do that. So we're trying to go from this kind of island mentality of we also obviously need to be competitive in our projects, but we also need to be efficient, whether it's an organization or whether it's our government agencies that should not be replicating and reproducing the same approach, and build a platform. Think in terms of shared services. And it's going to happen over time, but it's already possible today. And that's the part that is exciting. I think that as we get more constraints and more challenges, if we use this approach, it becomes possible to build more value for everybody, really. And it's an opportunity for those that want to plug in. It's a risk for those that don't want to. There's a lot of hesitation because this turns over contractual hourly rates, status quo. All of that needs to be kind of upended. But this is the time to do it for the future and for today. Thank you.